Thank you and welcome. Welcome to our cybersecurity program this morning. On behalf of the Women's Business Development Center, I am so glad you are all here. My name is Karen Goldner. I'm our Managing Director of Established Business Services in our Chicago headquarters office. I want to thank Jesse Leonard, who is our Director in Wisconsin in the Milwaukee office, for pulling this together. And I also especially want to thank our subject matter expert extraordinaire, Adonica Randall, who is the CEO of Abaxent, one of our certified WBEs in Wisconsin. All I want to say before I turn it over to Adonica is just how important it is and how much we appreciate your making this a priority. This is really like eating your vegetables, only not even eating good vegetables. It's more like eating old, nasty celery stalk vegetables or something. It's important that you do it, and it says a lot about you as a business owner that you have made this investment in time. And I know we are going to really learn a lot. This is going to be a lot more than you need to think about cybersecurity. This is going to really help you dig down into it. And so, Adonica, without further ado, let me turn it over to you.
Good morning to everyone that's here. Again, I echo Karen's thank you for taking the time to do this. This particular course, that workshop that we put together is really been a labor of love for myself and my partner colleagues to put something out there for small and medium-sized businesses as we start to traverse the cyber landscape. Why do you care about this at all? Um, Everybody knows that there's cyber threats out there, but I don't think what everybody understands is that our businesses are not at risk just because we can be cyber attacked, but our businesses are at risk because the people our clients that we work with are going to have requirements that we be cyber secure in order to continue to do work with them. So this is sort of think of this as Wicked is coming out in a couple of weeks. Can't wait to see it. You're getting on the path here to the yellow brick road, but you got to get on the path. This is a journey. This is the destination is not something that's a one and done. This is going to take a while, and it's going to take some experts to help you. And what we're going to do today is give you the baseline so that you understand why you care about this a lot and why you need to actively go down the road, preferably with some help to help you make sure that you can maintain your client base. We have engaged one of our partners who's an expert in all of the things that are coming down the pike. We appreciate the team that's coming together. We're going to start this off with my fractional CISO, and I'm going to pass it to Gina. And Gina, if you could, oh, there's a little slide. Sorry about that, Aaron. Okay, I talked about the purpose of the day, the goals and outcomes. We're going to tell you, we're going to start off with why this is important to you and what's happening out around you for things that you may not be seeing in the news or anybody's telling you. We're going to talk to you about what the CMMC framework. We'll explain what that is and why we have chosen that particular framework to go forward for compliance. At the end, we'll have, throughout this entire thing, you can please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We have several people that are online that can answer your questions in the chat. And of course, at the end, you can copy the chat. And then we'll have some closing remarks and next steps. And if you are here to the end of our presentation, we got some things that you may want to have that are going to be free for you. So with that, I'm going to pass that over to Gina.
Thank you, Adonica, and good morning, everyone. I'm Gina. Ms. Aaron, you can advance this slide, perfect. I act as a fractional CISO, and what that means is I go from global organization to global organization, helping security officers and cyber teams improve their cybersecurity posture or the way their organization looks and behaves online and with vendors and suppliers. I'm so happy to be here today because I've had a few experiences that I've actually signed contracts that I won't divulge, but I just feel like it's key and critical because we're all running small businesses and we need to know what's going on. And so one of the things about CMMC, about cybersecurity maturity, is that they're expecting a level of transparency. And although we'll understand what that means from their perspective, from my perspective, I've been on a few projects where because of my individual work effort, small businesses have lost contracts. And that wasn't my intention, but how it goes is something like this. An organization will have me come in, do a sweep of different businesses that are vendors, partners, and suppliers. And based on a scoring or some key indicators, often by and large, we attest to aligning with what our vendors and suppliers are expecting from us from a data and cybersecurity standpoint. And when they find out you don't, they don't say, hey, go fix this setting or go look at this policy. They send you a letter that says, we're going to go in a different direction with this project. Join this Zoom. We're going to take a couple minutes to help you off board from that organization because they don't want the risk. And so one of the things I wanted to share with you is that a large vendor that happened the first time with me with some 230 small businesses. And I was devastated because I wanted to develop a project and help them each individually figure out how to get on track. That was not a part of the plan. And so everything from presenting to you the information we do today to helping to understand that there are vendors, partners, and suppliers you're already working with that already know these things. One of the things I'm very thankful for is that we're able to come to you and share this with you so you feel like you have a place to go or some people who really care about the success of your business. And so when I mentioned that, another thing that pops into my mind that I feel like I have to share is if there is an incident, so that means your organization, either there's the indicator that you have been breached, which means a threat actor, someone maliciously or even inadvertently has traversed your network in some type of way, you may end up on a call with one of your vendors or one of your suppliers, and you're thinking that they're there to help. The other reason you really need to work with groups like the ones we're going to introduce you to is because that's not the case. They're aligning the strategy of how to go after you and your business as a result of that breach. And so I'm bringing these pieces of information, and I've been sharing this, so I'm so happy that Ms. Adonica listened to what I said and allowed me to participate because we really need to help. And this group, as I've been working with them, pulling together these slides, like they've really done their due diligence of understanding how this impacts small business. And so I'm happy to help however I can. So that's it for me, Ms. Donica. I can cover this one too. So why are we here? So we are the supply chain. Sometimes when organizations say supply chain, we think of these global organizations and it doesn't impact us. But if you think of how products and services come into the United States, small businesses are at the perimeter of that whole thing. And so we're a huge part of the supply chain. And if you look in your state or for your industry, small businesses make up a huge part of how these global forums operate. So the US supply chain forms the perimeter. And the Department of Defense aims to protect that. And this CMMC model that we're going to introduce to you today is one of the key reasons that they aim to do that and look for setting up strategies and helping your organizations get in alignment with what the security posture should be so that we can help protect the United States, of course, the data that each of your individual businesses have and how you can impact global organizations as well. So this is why we're committed to sharing this with you. The DoD is looking at this as their gold standard, and very soon other organizations are going to follow suit. Ms. Aaron, the next slide. So it's not about technology, it's about risk. And I apologize, but I know when you hear cybersecurity, it seems like a new term. Really, we're talking about overall business risk because once your organization is impacted, anything in your organization can be up for grabs so that those threat actors can traverse your organization, maybe take pieces and parts, and then hit your vendors and suppliers, which could be some of the global organizations or some of our critical infrastructure. And when I say critical, I mean healthcare, water, electricity, all of those things. So as we go through this, think about how your business needs other businesses for you to deliver. And as a result, if they're exposed, how it can impact your organization. So as I mentioned, the DoD is just the beginning. There's pieces of information that we'll talk about how it's flagged in a particular way. And I want to go through and define these terms as we hit these slides before I start using a bunch of acronyms. But just think about the different vendors and suppliers that not only you service, but that help you to deliver your product and service as you run your business. Next slide, please. Fantastic. I think this is my last one. So I just wanted to show here, if you look at the international revenue of organizations that are in retail, e-commerce, even healthcare, this international piece are all the pieces of information and parts that come from other non-US entities. And so often those non-US entities have a horrible risk profile. So another thing about the CMC is the United States aims to have those organizations step up their security measures as well. And so sometimes when I work with global organizations that are in some of the outlying countries and things, I'm working with them to help fix their cybersecurity posture. There are a few that their risk score was like 100% risk. And because no one's been looking at this, those organizations have been sending information and products and services back and forth, largely unchecked. And so another thing about this is if you're working in some of these areas, this cybersecurity maturity model is just the first step of them figuring out who's willing to get on board and who isn't. And so we're expecting this to be interactive. So if you have questions, definitely put them in the chat. But Ms. Erin, next slide, please. Yes. So I just wanted to mention this, Aaron, that's a great point. All of the IT organizations on this call have clients that would be considered as a part of this, absolutely. Okay, that's it for me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cody Stokes, and I think this one's for me. This is my slide. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity and Cloud Services at Priscillis Technology Incorporated. We're partnered with Abaxent, and we've been working with them over the last several months to put this together and to provide all this information around what's coming down the pipe with federal contracting, federal acquisitions, and not just DoD, but across the Fed in general. Myself, I've been engaged with CMMC and NIST Special Publication 800-171 Consulting for the past 2 years or so. And I manage a small team that we've been working primarily in higher education, but we have been working in the defense industrial base as well, providing some consulting here and there in preparation for CMMC and the extended CUI rules across the federal government. Now, if you don't know what CMMC is or CUI rules, we're going to get into that. But we can just go ahead to the next slide, Aaron. So as Gina and Adonik have talked about, the whole purpose of this webinar is to help you understand what's going on and what's coming down the pipe and what's going to be affecting you. CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's the DoD's methodology for assessing the compliance of its contractors, of its defense contractors, against the NIST 800-171 Revision 2 Cybersecurity Control Framework. This is a part of a larger effort across all of the federal government to control CUI, or controlled unclassified information, and to verify that contracting companies and their suppliers are implementing the proper safeguards to protect controlled unclassified information. That's essentially the whole purpose of what is going on in the federal acquisition space. And what that kind of means for you as small businesses, medium businesses, if you're not a prime contractor or a direct contractor with the federal government or the DoD, there are flow down requirements that are coming into these regulations where if you are supplying services or processing any of this CUI or federal contract information for a prime contractor, you are now going to be in scope for their assessment, for their evaluation and validation to the DoD or any other executive agency that they are protecting the CUI that's given to them. So there's a potential here, and I guess what I'm trying to link back to is what Gina's saying, is that a lot of these prime contractors, because of the implementation of this new framework and these new practices, larger prime contractors are not in the mood, if you will, to work with you. A lot of them are going to cut ties and move forward with somebody who is certified or who is able to provide the evidence they need or have the practices in place so that they can get certified as quickly as possible so they don't lose out on their prime contractor or prime contracts. So that's something to consider. What we're going to be talking about today is authorized providers. Who can you get help from? Where to go to find help in understanding your place in CMMC with your contractors or with your customers and their potential liability with their contracts, things like that. What the conflict of interests are within the CMMC model, and how to make sure that if you find somebody you like to work with and you want them to maybe do your assessment, and how they can't do your preparation as well as your assessment, and vice versa. So there's some things there that we're going to be talking about. Next slide, Aaron. So, okay, next slide. So this is just some background data for everybody to understand why the Fed is coming down with all of these CUI rules in around these supply chain attacks. There's been a lot of stuff in the news over the last several years with nation state actors stealing a lot of intellectual property from universities, from defense contractors, all over the place. So this is just some background information for you to maybe take notes on or move forward. But as you can see, it's, in 2022, 600% threat actor increase in activity. So this is a big deal, not only from the threat actor side, but the federal government and its regulations are taking it into account with its contractors. Next slide, please. So this is getting more into the defense industrial base and the analysis that's been done on them over the last several years on the implementation of the CUI program in there. And I believe some of this is coming from the Office of Inspector General, where they were going through and assessing the self-assessments or the joint surveillance assessments from some of these companies, that these defense contractors that were voluntarily participating in this program, and finding out that only 12% were pretty close to their confidence level and what they thought they had in their assessment. Then 82% were below expectation on their implementation of these controls and of these cybersecurity frameworks. So there's a lot of people out there that think they're doing the right things, but when it comes down to the actual evaluation and putting a third eye on their infrastructure, they're coming up short. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about consulting or getting any help from a CMMC aligned organization, is understand that you might think you're in a good place, but when that DODI or when that CMMCI looks at your environment, that with their expertise in that compliance framework, it might not be as good as you think it is. So that's just something to consider. Next slide, please. So, okay, now we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the contracting and the rules. So we're going to get into the different levels of CMMC and what that means for defense contractors in a minute. But essentially, the thing to remember is that what's going to apply to your company as a prime contractor or subcontractor, it really depends on the contract itself. Depending on the program managers within the DoD and how they determine the level of scrutiny or security that a contract requires when it comes to its CUI, that will determine what level the contractor is going to be required to have upon award of that contract. Now, what that also means that the flow down requirements to suppliers and managed service providers are also going to be an extension of what that contract requires as well. Now, what this is saying in the slide is that the best way to achieve that compliance with your desired CMMC model, or what your expected CMMC level is to use a system security plan and a POAM. And those are great things to have. In fact, for a level 2, it's a pass, no pass situation if you don't have a system security plan that outlines what you're doing with your information security program. But the POAMs are essentially those documents that working through consulting or internal evaluation of your environment, you use those security controls, those NIST 800-171 framework controls and the assessment methodology to establish your plan of action to become compliant with that in order to be a supplier on those contracts or be a prime contract holder. Now, just to be clear, you don't have to make these CMMC level compliance efforts prior to bidding. You can still bid on contracts, but you have to become compliant upon contract award. So that's just a little nitty gritty there. But when you look at the timetables, if you have the ability to get it done before bidding, great. But if not, you do have some time between bid and final award to get those last few things shored up for your compliance. Next slide. Okay. So here we go. Now we're getting into some of the definitions here. So FCI is federal contract information. That is what is going to be attached to all federal contracts, and it has a certain level requirement within CMMC of level 1. And as you can see here, that's based in the FAR clause 52.204-21. And those safeguarding requirements outlined in there align to the level 1 within DoD. But that FAR clause, it's important to remember, is that is all federal acquisitions. So all federal contract information is going to be guided by this harmonization from NARA, the National Archives. And what they're trying to do within the federal government is create a standard process for evaluating and proving that companies, contractors are securing this information. And FAR Clause 52.204-21 is going to be expanded through Title 32, Part 202 to include some CUI elements to it across the executive branch. So that is happening currently. I believe the final the FAR CUI rule is in its public comments page, or it might have finished, but the final rule to require CUI protections across the entire federal government or across the entire executive branch is coming. So when we talk about CMMC and the DoD, that's kind of the first wave. All of the federal agencies are going to have to abide by some level of CUI evaluation and attestation for their contractors in the near future. And all federal contracts are going to have a CUI provision or level requirement of their own making. Not to say that they're going to copy CMMC, but let's face it, some agencies probably will. So they're going to have their own way of evaluating this. And then as you can see here, controlled unclassified information, that is defined by NARA, and the Defense Department contracts that require it, or the provision that requires defense contracts to have a CUI clause or the safeguarding of CUI clause, is the DFARS clause 252.204-7012. There are some other ones beyond 7012 that apply to the actual implementation of some of those safeguards. But when you start on your journey of analyzing your CMMC risk, if you will, and what your liability is to that framework, if you have defense contract customers, be sure to understand that there are more clauses within the DFARS rules that apply to you. Next slide.
Cody, if I could interject in the
Yes.
middle. One of the things for the people that are online, there's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of what sounds like code words. One of the things that I will interject in here is that we are talking about something that is pretty much already the gold standard of how things will be evaluated. That's really, really what Cody's talking about. And it has a lot of moving parts to it. And you say, well, I don't work for the Department of Defense. Well, this is bigger than that. The Department of Defense is sort of where this is coming in. And Cody, if you can talk a little bit about how those things kind of connect, because everybody is saying, well, a lot of folks are saying, well, I don't work for the government. I don't work for the Department of Defense. But I'm gonna let Cody explain that this is like a global, this is like covering the earth of what's going to happen
Mhm.
because of a flow down. You may not, but we have larger clients, or you want to have larger clients, and there's very little in the United States that does not touch one of the government federal agencies. And what Cody is talking about is we are going in the direction that, because this will become the gold standard, all things will flow down from this, whether you see it coming or not. What we're talking about, it's not only coming, it's here. And that was where Gina started talking about, there are customers out there, and it's a little late once you get hit, um, or once you get rejected from the customer, or once you cannot get insured. So, I understand that this has a lot of moving parts. It has a lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
And we will make sure that you get a lot of these acronyms and those kind of things as follow up. But I want you to listen to this from the aspect of, the folks I serve are very concerned with this. Therefore, I have to be concerned with it for a multitude of reasons. So
Mhm.
thanks, Cody.
Yeah, absolutely, Donica, and that's a great point to expand on. And I think this slide kind of touches on it too, is that all prime and subprime contractors, and tier two, tier three, further down the line, are going to be affected, are actively affected by this within the DoD contracting space. But what I was trying to get to, and maybe I wasn't clear enough on it, is that there's currently rulemaking happening right now to expand this CUI program to the entirety of the executive branch and all of the executive agencies. And if NARA and the federal government and the Information Security Oversight Office want to have harmonization between all the executive agencies in which they do all of this together the exact same way everywhere, which I think would be a tall task, there will be some variation, but it's going to be based off of this CMMC model that is maybe not the gold standard, but it's the first standard. And
Right.
first is almost always the gold when there's no other, no other standards, right? So that's why it's important to understand CMMC, because everything else throughout the federal government and the executive agency and all federal acquisitions are going to be based in some part, large or small, on CMMC and on what the DoD has already proven is true and not true when dealing with their contractors. Things like the difference between allowing contractors to assess themselves versus having to go out to a third party and get certified. The DIB has proven over the last 5 or 6 years that self-assessments are not reliable. So the DoD is pushing really hard to have more third-party certification. What that means for you is, if you are affected by CMMC and you are being bound by those flow down requirements for your customer who's a prime or a subcontractor, now you're going to maybe have to go get certified in order to do business with them. So that's going to incur cost to you in order to service your current customers, potentially. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it could happen, and it's something you really need to consider, because as this slide also says, is that Q1 2025, Q2 2025, probably more likely, these defense contracts are going to start having these level requirements and these CMMC certification requirements attached to them, and they will be binding. And so these primes and subcontractors, they're trying to get ready now, so that they can continue to hold their current contracts or reestablish their current contracts for next year if they have a yearly requirement, whatever it is. So the time is now, and there's a saying within the CMMC community that you're either really early or you're really late to CMMC. There's no trying to hit it right on the sweet spot of when you need it is really hard to do because of the time it takes to implement. But we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yes, we've covered this. The anticipated is that 350,000 vendors of those tier two, tier three supply chain for those contracts are going to be impacted by this. That's the expectation, the estimate, if you will. The DoD's estimates are much more conservative because they can really only see the prime and the tier one subcontractors when they do their contracts. but when you think about kind of the panic of this new, maybe not panic's the right word, but the concern around this new industry and all of these companies trying to make sure all their ducks are in a row, that's going to expand. That's just, I think, the natural evolution of this is it's going to expand out to more and more subcontractors, and primes are going to be a little bit less lenient, if you will, with their subcontractors when it comes to this. Next slide. So, okay, here's kind of a breakdown of the changes that we've been talking about. The CMMC compliance started in 2017 when the DFARS clause that we discussed required that all DIB contractors or defense industrial base contractors have to abide by NIST 800-171. At the time, Rev 2, they specified it. It's revision 2 that you have to abide by in order to hold contracts. And then they started the rulemaking in how they're going to evaluate that, whether they're just going to accept the self-assessment scores that are put into the supplier risk management database, and whatnot. They were doing evaluations on over the last 5 years, 6 years, on whether or not that was sufficient. They found that it wasn't, and they started pushing the certification requirements. And that's what you see after the extended reach bit, in that these level ones are allowed to self-attest and put in their scores and do whatever they need to do internally. But level 2 requirements are going to primarily be forced to require a certification from a third-party assessment organization, also known as a C3PAO, CMMC third-party assessment organization, so there's no confusion between FedRAMP if you deal with that at all. But there is, in the interim, during the transition, there will be a chance for some companies to get level 2 self-assessment requirements in their contracts. But my assumption, and this is purely my assumption and my belief, is that these program managers that are responsible for setting these level requirements in their contracts, they're going to cover themselves a little bit. And so if there's any gray area, they're probably going to lean more to the stricter requirement of having the certification. So I don't think it's a wise move as a prime or a subcontractor to believe that you're going to get a self-assessment requirement for your contract. That would be a nice plus, but I wouldn't count on it, is what I'm trying to say. So that the supply chain bit at the end there is just hitting on that flow down requirement that we've been kind of hammering to death at this point. Is these prime contractors are going to be coming down on their supply chain, because the law and the rules as stated holds that prime contractor primarily responsible for their suppliers. So if their suppliers have a breach and it was a fault of bad verification or evaluation of their controls, that prime contractor is going to be on the hook with the DoD and the Department of Justice for that breach. So these primes are not going to play around with this at all. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So, okay, now we're getting into level 1 and level 2, the CMMC requirements. So as you can see here, CMMC level 1 is designated for all organizations that own within the DoD specifically, just to make sure we're clear on this, where this is only DoD contracts right now. All organizations that handle the contract information but don't receive any controlled and classified information as a result of that contract, they have to be level 1 certified. So that's everybody. That's everybody that deals with the DoD and is a prime or a subcontractor is going to have to be level 1 self-attested, self-assessment certified. And that's why they allowed that to stay self-assessed, is because it's going to be everybody. So having everybody required to do a certification on 17 controls, I believe they thought that would put undue strain on the DIB in terms of cost. So level 1 is going to be everybody that does contract information but doesn't deal with CUI or controlled unclassified information. Level 2, and as you can see, that involves 17 controls within NIST 800-171 Rev 2, which we'll get into in a minute. But it's a much lighter lift than level 2. Level 2 requires all 110 controls from NIST 800-171 Rev 2. And if you have in your contract the certification requirement, you will have to go to a certified third-party organization and have them come in and do your assessment and recommend those findings to the DIB-CAC, the certification authority, on whether or not you get level 2 or not. And that's where the crux of this is happening, is most of those flow down requirements that we've been discussing are going to be around level 2. Level 1 is going to have some of it, but it's a lot lighter lift. In your small or medium business, depending on your interaction with your prime, might have to abide by 50 of those controls, 60, 70, all 110. So that's something that we definitely need to have in our business discussions with small and medium businesses if you are providing services to prime and secondary contractors. And again, just to reiterate, this is for DoD contracts now, but this probably will expand in some form or fashion as it stands, as what you're seeing here, to the rest of the federal acquisition space. Next slide.
Cody, before we change
Yes.
slides, could you, we talk about controls, and when we talk about cyber, people think, oh, you're talking about my computer and breaking into my computer. Can you give a couple of examples of just randomly any of the controls that are out there that are not really talking about the computers that sit on your desk or your phone?
Right.
Okay.
I believe we have some slides coming up around level 1 that addresses some of that, but I can touch
I'm
on it
sorry.
really quick. No, that's okay. So these controls cover 14 domains, and within each of these domains have a subset of controls that apply to a certain theme, if you will. So there's access control and how you allow users to log into their computers and whatnot, but there are also awareness and training controls on how you are training your personnel to be cyber aware, how to recognize insider threats, things like that. There's a personnel security domain that discusses how you are screening and vetting individuals prior to giving them access to CUI. There's a physical security domain that discusses how you're securing the infrastructure for your business and for the CUI itself, I should say, not for your business, but for the locations that transmit, process, and store CUI. And it all revolves around that CUI piece. So there are strategies and techniques that you can utilize to mitigate some of those controls and make them easier to implement. But this is across all domains, not just technology. The NIST 800-171 framework addresses areas not specific to just a computer or a server or a network. It handles media, removable media, physical protection, personnel security, a plethora of different areas outside of technology that have to be considered. But we'll get into a little bit more in that with CMMC level 1 because it has a nice blend of the different things. So next slide, please. Right. So kind of what we were just talking about is that this is about accountability. This is not about technology. This is about risk. This is about transparency to the federal government. Not necessarily transparency from the federal government. This is your transparency to them. And as a supplier, your transparency to your prime or to your customer, who may be a prime contractor who has to have that transparency to the federal government. So this whole system is built around that transparency. And so even within the certifications from C through PAOs, there's going to be a requirement from these companies when you get your level 2 certification, let's say, or you provide your level 1 self-assessment every year. You're going to have someone sign off on your attestation that you're continuing to do those things. So in year 1, you get your certification. Year 2, somebody from your organization has to put into the SPRS, the supplier risk registry, that you're still doing those things exactly how you said you were doing them before, or documenting changes that were made, but how they're still compliant to your system. So there's going to be that. And something kind of aside here, there's a requirement within the new rule that was actively participated on by the Department of Justice that all assessment material has to be held by both the assessing organization and the organization seeking certification or contract to hold that evidence for 6 years, because that's the statute of limitations for False Claims Act prosecution. So they want the Department of Justice is very involved in making sure that these contractors are doing what they're saying they're doing, and that their suppliers are saying what they're doing, and they are making examples of companies right now, which I'm not going to speak to at this moment. But if you think this is going to be kind of, oh yeah, it's no big deal, the Fed's gonna not care, or I'm just gonna put 110 on my assessment and be totally fine, that would not be advisable. I would not do that. So just forewarning. Next slide, please. And I kind of talked about this. The DOJ is coming after companies, not necessarily to try and find people who are intentionally subverting this, but they're also trying to find people who are unexpectedly or unintentionally not compliant, and they're hitting them just as hard as the people who are intentionally trying to subvert these regulations. So False Claims Act doesn't differentiate. If you did it on accident, you're still getting slammed with something. If you did it on purpose, you're going to get slammed with more, obviously. But but just keep that in mind, is that these individuals that are responsible for attesting at your organization or at your prime organizations, they are personally on the hook for this. Not just the company, them personally. That's the accountability that we're talking about here. Next slide, please. So now we're getting into False Claims Act penalties. So this is what I'm talking about. You're getting slammed if you unintentionally do it. You're gonna face more than likely the civil damages and treble damages. So per infraction. That's the issue that a higher education institution is going through right now, is they broke a lot of the rules and they're getting hit with that 11 to 23,000 plus treble damages per rule, and it's to the tune, I think last time I read about it, tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars that they're on the hook for paying in civil damages to the federal government. Now, if the DOJ can prove that you intentionally did this to subvert the federal government in the process of getting a contract award, then you're looking at up to 5 years in prison per claim. So if you falsified 10 records, that's 50 years. That's what we're looking at. And the Department of Justice is actively involved in this, and they're not playing either. So this is real. This is not something that's going to go away. It's coming. It's here, and it's going to expand into more. So we can move on to the next slide. We don't need to be all doom and gloom today. So now the bright light at the end of the tunnel, getting ready, and talking about what it's going to take to avoid all that. So before, when we said we're here to help you find the people that'll help you get ready for this, or to get you ready to support your prime contract customers within the defense industrial base. These are the roles that we're talking about here. On the left is a registered practitioner. That is a person that is authorized and has received some training on what CMMC is from the Cyber AB, which is the CMMC accreditation board. I believe it's board or bureau, I can't remember, but it's a private entity that handles the CMMC ecosystem for the DoD. And registered practitioners are an extension of that. They are, as of now, designated to consult as only consultants, and they can only consult on level 1 controls. That's going to go into effect in December of this year. So if you're doing some level 1, or you have to do only self-assessment stuff on those 17 controls, registered practitioner is probably going to be a low-cost option for you as a consultant to come in and help you with that. Now, a CCP or a CMMC certified professional, they're that next tier up. They received a proctored exam, some extended training on level 2 controls and the assessment process, and what a company needs to do to work on level 2 controls and assessment objectives. If you need level 2 assessment, you're going to want to go, or assessment assistance or consulting, you're going to want to find a CCP or a CCA, which is what we're talking about as a certified assessor. CCPs are allowed to perform assessments with CCAs, but they can only evaluate level 1 controls within a level 2 assessment. And I know we're getting into some nitty gritty here, so bear with me. Hopefully you all can, read back or watch back the recording if I get going too fast here. But CCAs are your rock stars. They're your primary people that are going to be performing assessments for you to get your level 2 certification. They also can perform consulting actions to help companies get ready for level 2 certification or level 1, depending on what you want. But they're going to have the years of experience and the training, the extended training on what to look for when getting ready for your level 2 assessment, and how to prepare your artifact evidence and get yourself ready to present everything to your assessment organization in the right way that makes your assessment process as smooth and non-painful as possible. Because it's not an audit, it's an assessment. There's going to be no recommendations on the back end of what you could do better. That's just going to be pass, fail, see you later. And that's going to be done from a see-through PAO. They're going to be the organization that provides that assessment piece. In fact, myself and another colleague of mine who, I'm a CCA, but he's a CCP and he's going to be becoming a CCA here very shortly. We are currently working with see-through PAOs to perform assessments under their banner going forward in Q1, Q2 of 2025. So, we're well versed in that area, and these see-through PAOs they're on the hook too for these FSA or these false claims acts, risks, because they have to hold on to these assessment artifacts for the same amount of time. And if these CCAs mess up, they could be on the hook for false claims act stuff with the company personally. So that's the CCAs that I've worked with, and myself personally, we take it very seriously with level 2 certification. It's not a day at the park. We definitely want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and that you are as rock solid as possible before you go for assessment and before the see-through PAO gives you that recommendation for level 2 assessment. But all of these roles, if you need to find somebody within any of these roles, you can go to the Cyber AB marketplace, which I believe we have a link in one of the slides coming up. Or you can just Google Cyber AB and you'll be able to find it from there. I believe it's cyberab.gov. .org. And you can go to the marketplace and find any of these people. If you want somebody to come work on site, you can narrow it down by location and all that kind of stuff too. So that's where you would go to find these people and these companies to help you out. Next slide, please. So yeah, now we're talking about prep time and what it's going to take to achieve these levels. As we talked about, CMMC level 1 doesn't require a certification from a third party, but you will be inputting your self-assessment scores to the SPURS platform, the Supplier Risk Registry. And it's important to note that the DoD, within its rulemaking, has reserved the right to perform snap audits on any scores that they see they need to assess, or if a certain contract has a certain risk profile or a company has a certain risk profile by their determination. So even if you don't have a certification requirement with a third-party organization, I would recommend that you have all of your ducks in a row for level 1, all of the evidence you need to prove what you're saying you're doing is true, because the DoD will give you 14 days to respond to them if they want to come and audit you, and that you'll respond and they'll be on site and be evaluating you within those 2 weeks. So it's not something that you'll have time to remediate or fix after you put your score in. So make sure it's all good to go. And as you can see here, it takes approximately 6 months to implement these 17 controls within level 1. That varies depending on the maturity of your organization as it stands prior to your advancement. 6 months is the average. by our estimation and the DoD's estimations. So, might only take you 3, could take you a year, depending on what you have in place already. CMMC level 2, 12 to 18 month is the estimate as well. But as we've kind of talked about with the DIB readiness before, where 82% of participants weren't ready, even though they thought they were, that was 5 years, over 5 years of preparation. So some companies are well beyond that 18-month prep mark and they're not ready yet. So it depends on, again, where your starting point is on when you'll be level 2 certified. And given the current number of C3 PAOs out there and the number of assessors, certified assessors that are available to perform assessments, you're looking at right now anywhere from 9 to 15 months before you get an assessment date. There are wait lists 6 months long, 7 months long at some C3 PAOs right now. And the rule doesn't go into effect until December, and the contract requirements aren't going to be in effect until next year. So there's already a wait list. So essentially, if you want to do this, if you need to do this, is a better statement, it's going to take a long time just to get to this finish line. And the key thing that Adonica said at the beginning is that the finish line isn't the finish line, it's just getting on the yellow brick road. Then now you have to persistently stay on it year over year in a test and prove that you're still on the yellow brick road once you get there. So that's just the other thing to consider here. Next slide, please. So yes, like we talked about, once you get on that yellow brick road, that yellow brick road is the ongoing compliance and cybersecurity investment that you make to get to it. So that will be that. What we're essentially talking about here is a fundamental shift in some companies in how they do business around cybersecurity. In my opinion, if you want to pursue this or you need to pursue this, security or cybersecurity cannot be an afterthought. It has to be involved at the very beginning of any business decision that is made going forward. And how you're going to adapt your cybersecurity to whatever business decision you're making. It has to be a part of the entire development life cycle of any process, expansion, merger, any of that you're considering as a business, in order to stay on top of your compliance and to stay on top of your cybersecurity practices. And that's what we're talking about with these technology upgrades, management, licenses, subscriptions. Those are business decisions. That's budget. That's what it costs to do this. And that has to be a discussion point when you're making the budget, not after it's made and you see how much you have left for cyber. So that's something that might have to change at some companies, is that fundamental shift away from security as an afterthought. Next page, please. And yeah, we talked about this budget, partners, vendors, suppliers. If you are becoming a vendor or supplier for a prime, or you are a prime and you have to choose partners, vendors, suppliers, now that cybersecurity conversation and the cyber maturity conversation has to come into that acquisition for you as well as the Fed. So that's just where I'm kind of hammering this point home, is this is that fundamental shift in business practice away from security as an afterthought. It has to be an integral part of the business from start to finish. Next slide.
One of the things I would also interject that we didn't put into our slides, but as you're speaking, Cody, that you have to consider is, what is your personal insurance for your company going to be? It's sort of year end, and I don't know about everybody else, but our insurance stuff comes up. We've gone in probably over the last maybe 3 to 5 years, where having cyber insurance is not only a requirement for the companies that we do business with, and it's not only because we have IT. They want to make sure that you don't not only endanger them, but you're protecting yourself. But for the insurance that we have, I know the paperwork that we've had to do to stay insured has gone from 3 pages to about 13. So a lot of the things that you are seeing here, where you may think, well, maybe this doesn't apply to me, is you're going to see it show up in your insurance forms because they're going to ask about the, how secure is the environment that you're working with, because they don't want to insure anyone who is going to be a threat to any of the customers they're working with. Again, this has nothing to do with the Department of Defense. This has to do with how are you protecting not only your data, but when you connect to somebody else, how are you making sure you're protecting upline their data? And as I said, most of the insurance companies, um, a lot of them don't want to insure smaller SMB based companies right this minute because they know that that is the target for most of the bad threat actors. We are the target for them anymore. It's not the large corporations, that kind of stuff. Sure, they get bombarded and stuff, but we're an easier target and a better target to go after. So as you start to look at some of the things that we're going through, this not only helps you with your compliance for being secure, but it also helps you with your insurance because this is going to come up. Pretty much a lot of the things Cody is talking about is showing up on our insurance forms. You know, and like I said, it doesn't matter whether you're working with the Department of Defense or whether you're working with somebody who has that flow down. It's irrelevant. They want to know that you will not, because I can't say it's like if you get hit. I'm going to say it's when you get hit. And you need to be secure before you need to have certain things in place in the event that that happens, because that can be devastating and totally and completely take you out of the game. So
No, that's a great point, Adonica, and it's somewhat it's parallel to what we're talking about here because essentially, when we talk compliance with this framework or with any federal regulation whatsoever, what we're really talking about is assurance. What the primes and subcontractors are providing to the federal government by complying with these frameworks is assurance that they are going to do what they need to do to protect the information that the federal government gives them. Now, you can interchange labels and titles and terms in there, but it's the same thing for insurance companies is they want assurance that if they have to pay out to support your breach or your downtime, that you did everything possible to prevent it so that their money is not at risk. The cyber insurance companies rates have gone up substantially in the last 5 years because of the sheer number of breaches and cyber insurance claims that have been made from companies who were not in a position to protect themselves, but had cyber insurance and just transferred all the risk to them. Well, now cyber insurance companies don't have any more money. I don't want to say any more money, but they're running out to pay out on this and they're having to charge higher and higher premiums. So this has a trickle down effect into all facets of business life, from cyber insurance to federal contracting to eventually, in some cases and in some states, state contracting and local government contracting. Everybody wants a level of assurance from these companies, from these contractors, that they're doing their due diligence in protecting the information and the services that are provided to them. So that's something to think about, is that this is kind of marking a fundamental shift in thought process from contract awarders and business ventures, in that they want that assurance from you as a company that you're going to take care of them and it's going to be a mutually protective situation. So that's just something to think about, is that this is expanding beyond federal contracting as a cultural shift. But getting back into CMMC, so these are some of the domains for CMMC level 1. As you can see, we have physical protection, media protections, communications, access control. These things are diverse. They're not only technology related, and we're going to get a little bit more in depth into that. And just a reminder, these level 1 controls are the controls that are self-assessed, and you put them into that supplier risk registry for the DoD and all federal acquisitions. So this is level 1. Next slide, please. So yeah, just going back over it that we talked about, this is only for companies that handle federal contract information, but do not handle controlled unclassified information within defense contracts. And we're talking about self-assessment. Next one. So here's an example of what you need to pay attention to when it comes to evaluating whether or not you are meeting these controls. So as you can see here, what we're looking at is the control, access control AC level 1, 3.1.1. You can see the security requirement there, which is the tagline for what you're doing with this control. You're limiting access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of users, and devices, including external systems. So if you have a Dropbox or something, access to and from that Dropbox, if it's holding FCI or CUI or whatnot, you have the access to those systems and those devices, processes, and users are controlled. Now, the assessment objectives that you see on the right determine if you were to be audited by the DoD for your level 1 self-assessment, they're going to go through these determine if statements or these determining statements and evaluate each of these practices. If you are failing any one of those practices, you fail the whole control. Let me say that again. If you fail any one of these practices, you fail the whole control. So if you have devices and users access controlled and everything's all good, they're identified, the authorization is identified and all that, but you don't have processes acting on behalf of users identified, you fail the control. And if you said you had it good when you put it in SPURS and you were compliant and they come back and say that you're not compliant, now we're talking about FSA stuff. And now we're talking DOJ coming involved. So when we talk about the 110 controls, and I didn't want to say this earlier because I wanted to have the context around it before I said it. It's not just the 110 controls that are assessed for level 2 or the 17 controls that are assessed for level 1. It's all of these practices in the determine if section of the CMMC assessment methodology. And so we're not talking about the 110 controls with level 2, we're talking about 320 practices for level 2. And I believe it's something like 50 or 60 practices for level 1. And those are the things you need to evaluate when you determine whether or not you have that control implemented, because that's what the DoD and by extension, potentially in the future, any other federal agency is going to evaluate to determine whether or not you have met that control. So I know there's going to be some questions around that, but that's within CMMC, that's the key point. 320 practices, 110 controls for level 2, 17 controls in level 1, something like 50 or 60 practices. So each of these things might need their own investment beyond what you currently do. So that's something to consider. Next slide, please.
Hence
So
the
now we're
reason to budget. Right?
Yes, and hence the reason why.
For.
Exactly, and also hence the reason why I said that going down this path and moving into this attestation game and this verification game with the federal government and by extension cyber insurance and all of that has to be a business process that's discussed prior to or along with every other business process and budgetary discussions. Mm-hmm. Because of the investment that you may need to make right off the bat to get there, as well as the continued investment in budget to maintain it. You know, like you always used to hear in school, it's really easy to get the A. It's really hard to keep it. And that's where the governance and the processes you put in place to maintain those controls go on. But I believe what we're going to do over the next couple of slides is talk about each of the controls within level 1. So access control has the largest number of controls, I should say, is the domain that has the largest number of controls in all of 800.171, but also within level 1. I'm sorry, this is a lot. Perfect. Sorry, I thought that was a question. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, and I'm fully expecting some people are probably looking at this and going, whoa, this is insane. And you might be right. If this is the first time you're seeing any of this,
Yeah.
this is a big shocker. I've been living in it for 2 years, 2+ years at this point. So it's not that big of a shock to me. But when I first started learning about what the federal government was doing with this, I went, I don't know who's going to be able to do this. But a lot are doing it. They're on the path to do it. It is possible. It's not an insurmountable standard. It's just a fundamental shift in the way everybody's doing things. And that's going to have some hard times, but it's going to be okay. We'll get through it and get to the other side of it and find what the promised land, if you will, and figure out how to navigate.
The promised land. Yeah.
But
Well, it is a lot, but it's that's why this is a workshop. A lot of the courses that you will see that talk about cyber and CMMC and all the things, they are really meant to have folks come in and sell you something. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're trying to educate you so that you understand that this touches a lot of realms of your business. And if you are not involved in it immediately today, you will be, even if it's nothing except for your insurance base. No insurance company anymore is going to insure any business that is not at least itself internally cyber secure. So you're gonna hit that wall right out of the gate, because we all serve larger clients in a lot of cases. And the larger clients, which is why we started off with Gina's story, the larger clients are sort of coming in with machetes and they're cutting people with no conversations, no explanations, no anything, because they can't. They can't. They're not responsible for their vendors. And they have their own insurance issues, and they're upscaling to other clients that are requiring these things of them. This, unfortunately, we're the smallest. It's like Niagara Falls. It's coming over the side, and it's a flow down, and we're at the bottom. But we still have to comply. We don't have options. So that's to Cody's point. This is a lot to learn. Trust me, we've all had to. We're looking at it going, oh, and your head's doing this. Our intent, the goal today is to expose you to it, and for you to be able to think about it and try to start to put puzzle pieces together to say how, I'm standing here at the beginning of the yellow brick road. I don't even see the Emerald City. I know it's somewhere out there. Okay. It is out there, and there is a road, and, just absorb as much as you can, take notes, and we'll have some information for you at the end so that, we can try to make the road a little clearer.
I wanted to share kind of quickly one small example. So in looking at an organization, just seeing what assets were tied to their network, I could tell that the business was by and large like a small salon or boutique firm that were getting products and services from a larger organization. But one of the laptops was actually in a different country. And so I know with small business owners, sometimes when we have assets and things, we want to get the full value out of them, even if we can't use them for our own business. So later on, when I ran into the business owner, her daughter was actually in college. And while she was in college, traveled to Tel Aviv. And so the laptop was with her daughter, and the proprietary application that was for that large vendor or supplier was then in the other country with her daughter in this laptop. So unfortunately, there was very little that I could do to kind of reel that in and pull it back. But sometimes in these contracts that small businesses sign, we attest to making sure that their applications and things don't end up in countries that they don't do business with. And so this is one of the things that just inadvertently, no fault of hers, she lost like one of her major clients. And so this is the type of thing that you don't want to just find a company that's checking a box. It's much more than that. You want to find an organization that understands the full implications of some of these questions, because even though they say you can self-assess, you probably need a team that really understands not only what level 1 looks like, but what level 2 is going to look like, so you don't get ravaged by level 2. And so I appreciate what you said, Adonica. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to slightly disagree with Adonica on one point. These big businesses are responsible for you within CMMC. If you're a supplier and they're a prime contractor, they're being held responsible for you. And so they're not going to suffer any fools, if for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And they're going to cut you loose if you're not
No,
up
you're
to
a
snuff with that.
1000% correct, and that's exactly right. Because they are responsible for you, they are making themselves not responsible for you by getting rid of you.
Exactly.
Okay, because
Yeah.
that's really what the thing is. And to Gina's point, where she started off, what a devastating blow to a small company that has a major client that they finally secured, and then all of a sudden, you've been told to make a mandatory meeting where you're being offboarded. That is, I mean,
Or even
that's like
worse,
worst case scenario.
yeah. Or even
Mhm.
worse, a small business that's trying so hard to get into a vendor supplier and they think, well, was it our pitch? Was it our team? Did we not have the right price point? Did we not wear the right shirt? Did we not have enough glitter? On and on and on. And it just
All
turns
right,
out your cyber posture is in the garbage. Like, and so
right.
the likelihood
Mhm.
you're going to realize that with the way that we do business is going to be low. So even if you feel like you're not impacted now, having someone take a look could probably really help your business to not only understand from you what vendors and suppliers you're trying to get into, so we can look at their security requirements and see what your business should be doing, but as you
Right.
move forward, how your security posture should look so that you can participate.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, security posture is a plan. And Cody started off talking about, your budget and those things, and basically, you now have to add that to what you are reviewing and planning for, and to
Mhm.
see where in your target market, upstream, that this has impact.
Mhm. And to that point, kind of tying it together with Gina's example, two of the controls on the sheet that we're looking at right now would have helped that small business. At
Absolutely.
3.1.1, in having that device listed or limiting the access of that proprietary device that her daughter was using at college or whatever, to where it couldn't access any business functions, but it was just owned by the business, and they had all the access control processes in place. What probably would be one thing that saved them, but also verifying control limit connections to and use of external systems, putting in geolocking on that device, on your internet access for that device, and making sure that it can't access the internet outside of the US. Stuff like that would have also helped on that trip if that person took that. So when we talk about these controls, they're not necessarily hurdles in your way. They can be if you view them that way, but if you apply them to the scenarios that you'll probably deal with in whatever consulting that you get, or when you think outside the box a little bit with them, they turn into kind of golden gooses that protect you. Especially if you put them in place and then document that you have them. That documentation, that supporting evidence, is going to be able to protect you from a situation like that, where if they say, hey, we need to shut down business with you because of your cybersecurity, they're like, what do you mean? There's nothing wrong with that. It was just our proprietary device. Yeah, it was IntelliView, but it didn't connect to anything. It's totally secure. Now you have a leg to stand on in that negotiation and in that process. But we can go ahead and go to the next slide, because these are just 4 of the 17 controls. Now, physical protection, this is a key one that I wanted to point out in how it differs from traditional technology or cybersecurity control frameworks. These protections are around where you store your CUI or your FCI if you have an on-prem environment, or where you have your computers and your devices that do process, store, or transmit FCI in the case of level 1, or CUI in the case of level 2, and how you manage the access to those things physically. So your network closets, the endpoints, the servers, your building itself, your people that have access to CUI or FCI, controlling access to them and for them, to make sure that only the right people are allowed to go into the areas that are sensitive, that process, store, transmit that FCI or that CUI, and any visitors are escorted, and that you maintain that documentation to prove that you are doing these things for physical access. So key points or key things to look at that are not IT related necessarily. Might be if you're employing some kind of badge reading or biometric scanner or some kind of thing for your building, that can be IT related, but the practices and the processes themselves are going to be business related. They're going to be procedural. They're going to be administrative. It primarily, by and large. But next slide, please. And then systems and communication protection. There's only one control from this domain within level 1. That domain for level 2 is 16 controls. It's the second largest domain for level 2. But within level 1, they just picked the first one, which kind of is the catch-all, if you will, within that domain, to make sure that you are monitoring, controlling, and protecting your communications, both internally and externally to other systems. So that's VPNs, that's firewalls, that's segmentation on your network, key internal boundaries, documentation in a network diagram. Things like that is what this control is really pertaining to. But next slide, please. And system information integrity. This domain is actually a little bit, as a whole, kind of a catch-all for a lot of other domains. It's kind of a consolidating domain, where in other domains within level 2, you deal with things like system updates and system maintenance. 3.14.1 is kind of a broad umbrella control around system maintenance and correcting flaws and errors that you find when you do updates or you have bug reports or something like that around your applications. Malware within the maintenance domain that's not in level 1, there's protections around where malicious code is it is placed and how malicious code protections are put in place and how it's put in place. And 3.14.2 simply wants you to designate where you've put your antivirus, essentially, and make sure that it's there wherever you said you put it. If you put it on all devices, great. Make sure it's there and it's documented. And same thing with 3.14.4. If you have malicious code protections, how often are you updating it? Is it manual? Is it automated? Make sure you have verifications and controls put in place for those, and documented. 3.14.5, that's more what an antivirus does. So when you go out buying an antivirus, let's say for your business, because if you're a smaller business, you don't have somebody that's monitoring this and doing this all the time. So you're going to be kind of relying on your vendor to do that, or your McAfee or your Norton or whatever it is that you go out and buy. You want to make sure that you're getting those real-time scans on downloads, opened or executed from the internet, from external sources, and that it's doing those periodic antivirus scans every day, week, month, and you document that, and you make sure that it's performing it as you document it. Don't say you're doing something or that it does something that it doesn't do, because they'll hit you with that too and say you're not compliant because it's not doing what you documented that it does. And if you don't have documentation on it, they'll ask you, well, how do you know? How do you know it's performing periodic scans? So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But next slide. I think that's it for them for level 1. Nope, there's 2 more. So identification and authentication, similar to access control, but more around just making sure that, as you can see, identifying system users, processes, and devices. That's similar to 3.1.1 that we talked about before, which is in access control. But this is where, if you have that Active Directory environment, you have specific unique identifiers for each of these things acting in your network or on behalf of your network, so that if you have a breach, it's easier to track and trace what individuals are doing or what devices are doing and get into that attribution stage of the investigation. It's kind of the purpose of these controls.
Cody, I just wanted to share here quickly. So when I'm working with small businesses, one thing that I think kind of helps is often we are in collaboration with other businesses too. And so this line that says identify system users, processes, sometimes that involves other organizations. And so one of the ways when you're, even though it says self-assessment, one of the ways that we can help you get through that self-assessment in a little bit better condition than if you really do it yourself is to then call on those vendors and suppliers and groups that you work with to make sure that the documentation you have with them helps you to check these boxes. And so instead of you going it alone, we have everybody participate because they all need to know what's going on to help protect you too. And so in doing that, sometimes it decreases the cost for you in doing it because you have this group collaborating with you to get it done. And so I just wanted to share that.
Right, absolutely. And that's a great point for level 2 especially, but level 1 just as important. But with every one of your vendors, let's say as a medium business, you are a prime contractor for the DoD. Every one of your vendors that you're using that you've off put some of this functionality to, we want to make sure that you create a strong consumer responsibility matrix with them, or customer responsibility matrix with them, and you clearly delineate what they're responsible for protecting, how they're responsible for protecting it, and what you're taking responsibility for in your interaction with that vendor. That's going to be more important for level 2, but it is just as important for level 1 to make sure you have a clear understanding with your vendors and your suppliers that you've offloaded some of these responsibilities to, that they have all their ducks in a row for your liability with level 1.
Right.
Because again, it's your score that you're putting into Spurs. You're going to be responsible for it. So if they're messing it up, you're going to be held responsible, even if they're your vendor.
Absolutely. And so if you do this right, you can see right away of how the cost isn't just all on you. You may have already signed contracts and things that make other people responsible and liable for these things. And when we look over that, we just, instead of you going it alone, we get those other groups involved and we push that down, because you're providing to these other companies, vendors and things, opportunities to work with you and your vendor and supplier. And so in that level 1 area, we can give you a firm foundation. So level 2 isn't as difficult and complex. It's
And this is
difficult, but not as difficult. Yeah.
No, yes. And it's actually, even though it's slightly more difficult, it's a great boon for your business, because there are a lot of companies out there that give you SLAs and SLOs about what they're going to do for you, and they're not delivering. I've dealt with it with a lot of my customers. So when we sit down and start doing this, you realize, hey, you're not doing this for me. Why am I paying you all this money and you're not doing this? But this says here in our SLA that you're going to be doing this. And then now that vendor goes, well, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we'll do that now. And so this is a way for you to actually hold your vendors accountable and make sure you're getting the protection you're paying for, and that your money is going where it needs to go.
I've definitely had small businesses make money off this thing by recouping all the things that people said they were doing that they weren't doing, and just call all those dollars home and say, okay, so look, we need to redo this contract. Yeah.
Right. And that's a very key important point, because we've actually been talking a lot about how much this is going to cost, and cybersecurity is this expense. But in some cases, cybersecurity can make a profit by protecting and retracting some of those dollars and ensuring effective investment, so that every one of your dollars goes a little bit further. So there is that element to cybersecurity that's not always discussed, but it is important to remember, is that can happen for you.
Right. And so, you make a key point, Cody. This is something that while you're on the road yourself, you need to look at your suppliers and make sure, because this is a flow down. You don't want it to stop with you. And I'm going to take it again back to the insurance. Probably at least 50+% of what you have in your level 1 is things that you will be asked for on your insurance. Things like, how are you? I mean, just simple stuff. It doesn't matter what service you provide. The question is, you're using technology some kind of way, and you have people. I know one of the things, Cody, that I find, you talked about process. One quick side note. A lot of the times when I go in to look at folks, where we're taking a look at some of these things for assessment, especially manufacturing of anything, food, products, parts, doesn't matter. I always go in the back door. Why do I go in the back door? Because that's where the folks are on break and they're smoking and they're outside and they're sitting there. And guess what? The back door is propped open, right? That door should be badged. You are out of compliance right there. Just something that's simple. This has got nothing to do with your computers and your phones and all this other stuff. There's people sitting out there on a picnic table. I walk up. They have no idea who I am. They let me right. I have never not gotten in the back door. Never. 100%, I will get in that door and get on the other side. That is a massive violation of what we're talking about here. And this is procedural. This is not, I want folks to understand, this is just not about the tools and the tech and the toys. This is procedural things that are not being followed, are also part of this. Yeah,
they're cultural.
Thank you. Yeah, cultural is a big one.
So that's when we were talking earlier about, this isn't just risk, this isn't just tech, this is administration, this is company culture, this is making security a priority in the business.
Right.
from the top down. But we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So media protection. So when this talks about media, NIST has a really vague way of talking about media, because with everything being digital now, we look at PowerPoints as media, we look at videos as media, stuff that's only held on the computer. But media in terms of NIST 800-171, when they talk about it, are removable media. CDs, if anybody uses those anymore, removable flash drives, external hard drives, things like that, stuff that can be plugged into USB port to store, transmit, or process CUI or FCI. Those things are what they're talking about when they talk about sanitize or destroy system media. And not only just for disposal, like when you're going to throw it away because it's old, it's broken, whatever, but if you're going to take back from one employee and give it to another employee, you have to have processes and things in place to make sure you've sanitized that device, that media, before you hand it back out. Now, something that only gets talked about when you do CCP and CCA training when it comes to media protection, the media protection domain in general, but specifically around 3.8.3, is that what the assessors are going to look for is if you're using sanitization or disposal methods that are compliant or aligned with NIST's special publication 800-88. So 800-88. That is the NIST guidance for media sanitization and disposal. And one thing I forgot to mention when it comes to media, paper media is also a designation within the media protection system. So if you've printed out CUI or FCI for a folder or whatnot, and that needs to get shredded, you want to follow NIST 800-88 for how you shred it, what kind of shredders you use. That there's specific regulations or guidance on how you have to shred that paper to make sure it's sanitized or destroyed properly to be in compliance with this control. So that's kind of an extension of this, but something to consider when you're going and looking at this one. Paper media, removable media, CDs, DVDs, flash drives, all that stuff, you have to have the processes in place and proof that you're doing it. So again, put the process in place and make sure you have documentation from whoever's responsible for that. Or if you contracted a recycling company, you get that customer responsibility matrix that they're doing it the way you need it done. So that's this control, but we can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's the end of the level 1 slide, or the level 1 controls. There's only 17 of them. And if that was a lot, right? If that's, oh my gosh, I'm not doing any of those, right? If you're having that reaction, then I would say that that's a good starting place, right? And if you start there, getting to level 2 is a bigger lift. But if you're trying to start and go straight to level 2, and that's scaring you, level 2 is going to be really scary for you. So just a heads up, you definitely will probably want to go get some help. Go get some professional guidance to walk you through it, help you create those POAMs, because I can tell you from personal experience with customers of mine, when they've tried to create their own POAMs for level 2, they get pulled in a million different directions, and they kind of feel like, not enough butter scraped over too much bread, because they got so many things they need to invest in. So we want to make sure that you're getting the right kind of guidance and help to get you pointed in the right direction in the most efficient and effective way possible. So just throwing that out there, but we can go to the next slide and kind of talk more about the ecosystem. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. The Cyber AB, or the CMMC accreditation board or accreditation bureau, they are, or accreditation body, if you will, they are responsible for maintaining the ecosystem. They do not issue any certifications. They do not do anything with the OSCs, or the organizations seeking certification, except mediate disputes between the OSCs and the C3PAOs. So if you have an assessment and you think you were unjustly assessed by your C3PAO and you can't work it out with them, you can escalate it to the Cyber AB to make sure that that C3PAO is correct. So they're the head honchos, if you will, and they're also responsible through the CAICO, or the accreditation instruction body, for all the training for CCPs, CCAs, and registered practitioners. So that's their role. And as you can see there, cyberab.org, you go to the marketplace tab on the top right, you can go search up your local registered practitioner, CCP, CCA, or go there to find a C3PAO. The one thing I will say is a detractor from the marketplace is they do not have a rating system yet. I remember them talking vaguely at one point that after assessments get going and whatnot, that OSCs can go in and rate their assessors or rate their C3PAOs. So I'm not sure if that's going to come to fruition, but they are talking about it, I believe. So that's the only thing that I'll say is kind of a word of caution when you go to the marketplaces. There's no way to differentiate who's good and who's not. So just be warned of that. But we can go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit in the beginning around some of the rules around the ecosystem. Only registered practitioners are only going to be able to help consult with level 1. So if you need level 2 help, don't go to registered practitioner. And even with level 1, be careful which registered practitioner you go to. And this is my professional opinion. Registered practitioners do not get the same level of training on the controls or the requirements or the assessment process or the ecosystem as a whole, frankly, as CCPs or CCAs do. So if you do want to use a registered practitioner because it is the cheaper option, just be wary. If there's a registered practitioner advertising that they'll get you CMMC ready in a month, run. There's no way that person knows what they're talking about. So just be warned of that. Registered practitioners pay some money to the Cyber AB. They take a little bit of a training, and I am a registered practitioner from before I took my other trainings, so I know exactly what they go through. It's not very extensive, and they just pay for authorization, if I'm being completely honest. I don't want to take away from RPs because it is kind of a stepping stone to becoming the next level, and there are a lot of RPs with a lot of great experience in other frameworks, but there are also a lot of RPs that see the writing on the wall and want to cash in, is the best way I could put it. So just be wary is what I'll say to that. CCPs and CCAs, they're getting standardized training from licensed training providers. They've gotten tested by proctors. It's a much more controlled environment. They have to prove that they know what they're talking about in order to get their certification. So I highly recommend that if you're not sure, err on the side of a CCP or a CCA between an RP. But within that, understand that a CCP or a CCA that helps you get ready cannot then do your assessment. If you go to a C3PAO and have them provide you readiness services in getting ready for your assessment, or to help you with your level 1, or to help you with your level 2, rather, they cannot do your assessment after that within 3 years. So if you get help from them this year, you can't get help from them until 2027. Or you can't have them do your assessment until 2027. But they can help you every year in between. They just can't do your assessment. So just understand that as well. And prior to any assessment taking place, all parties, CCAs, CCPs, and the OSC officials that do the assessments, they have to declare any conflict of interest prior to doing the assessment. So if you know each other from school or whatever with your assessor, you need to document that, and then both parties, the OSC and the C3PAO, will decide whether or not that conflict of interest is worthy of either removing that team member or canceling the assessment and having you go somewhere else. So just understand that there are very clear and strict guidelines around conflict of interest and code of professional conduct within the Cyber AB. We don't want to have any inkling of impropriety, because those FSA, those False Claims Act, or FCA, those False Claims Act allegations are real. And any semblance of impropriety could hurt both the C3PAO and the OSC or the individuals involved in the assessment. So nobody's taking it lightly. But we can go to the next slide. So we already talked about this, the difference between FCI and CUI. FCI is any contract information for the federal government, in this case for the DoD, since that's what we're talking about within CMMC. And so to review, level 1 only deals with FCI and not CUI. Level 2 is only concerned with CUI. So you can store your FCI somewhere else and have that be a level 1 kind of domain, and then you can store your CUI in a different place in your environment, and that will be your level 2 domain. There's different ways to separate it, but what I see is most people just store it all together, FCI and CUI, and secure one place instead of having 2 different standards for 2 different places in their environment. But CUI is information that is marked as that. And CUI can be created by you potentially too, as the prime contractor. If you're creating controlled unclassified information for the federal government, you're responsible for marking it. You're responsible for controlling it and all of that. So that'll be factored into the contracts, as well as whether or not you as the company will be creating CUI for the federal government in your research or whatever. So that's just something else to consider. Is there's all kinds of NARA rules around what CUI is and how to classify it and how to mark it. But that's for you and your advisor or your consultant to work through on that part. But we can go to the next piece. So going beyond level 1, so going into level 2, I just want to touch again. When we say 110 controls, and I'm only saying this because the arrow is pointing right at it, just remember there are 320 practices that go along with each of those 110 controls. Some of the controls don't only have one practice that gets evaluated. Other controls have as many as 10 or 8 or 10. So each control is going to be different in the number of practices that they have. The system security plan control in particular has 4 or 5 different practices or things that need to be included in the system security plan, which we talked about at the beginning. But that is a pass or fail control. If you don't have a system security plan, your assessment never starts. The C3PO won't even deal with you. They'll tell you to come back. If you do have it, and then through the course of your assessment, you don't have all of the practices documented within it, then you'll fail that control. And that's the same thing with all the other ones. Now, if within your contract you are required to perform a C3PO certification, those are required every 3 years. So year 1 and year 3, you have to get those done from your C3PAO, especially especially if it's a long-term contract. Say you have a 10-year contract. Every 3 years you have to get that done. But every year in between, you have to attest that you are performing the same functions and doing the same things that your certification is for. Something else to consider is if you make any massive changes to your environment between year 1 and year 2, and it's too wildly different from what you were assessed on, then you will have to recertify in year 2. That's something that's not really discussed a whole lot, but it's kind of written in between the lines in the rules, is if you make significant changes to your environment between your certification date and your attestation date, you will have to recertify on those significant changes. A significant change to my mind would be you went from using AWS cloud, GovCloud to GCC from Microsoft. That's a significant change. You would have to get that GCC environment recertified through a C3PAO come year 2. So that's the way I would look at it. And again, those off years, those self-attestation years, you would upload your score, your self-attested score to SPURS. And again, be mindful, the DoD can and will come in and audit anybody they want. The DIBCAC will, oh, you've gotten 110 controls in the last 5 years. Let's take a look. And they'll want to see all your certification evidence from when you did your certifications. They'll want to see whatever your evidence was for your attestation years, everything. They'll come audit everything. So just be aware of that. Moving on. So I think this is where Adonica, you can step in and talk about this with you guys. And you're muted, by the way.
Actually, I'm gonna talk about this one. So
Okay.
we're running a raffle. I'm gonna put a link down here. Before I do that, if there are any questions, we definitely mean to answer your questions. You can pop them in the chat. But then I'm gonna put a link here where you can fill out your information, any questions you have, and then be entered into a raffle for a preliminary assessment. We'll give you an idea of where you need to start and some other individuals and information that you want to have at the ready, especially if you know some projects you have on hand right now that may need some review to help you understand your risk. So if there are no questions, I'll pop the link in. But does anyone have any questions that we should address? Anything at all?
I know Karen just posted one suggestion for the next step a business should take. Gina, do you want to take that one, or would you like?
Yeah, so the very next step is what I'll offer as you fill out this form is kind of a one-on-one where, you know, if you have some questions specifically for your industry, I'll try to answer them. If there's some legal pieces, I may need to have you work with your groups to bring forward some additional information so that we can give you the right answers to start off with. But I would say by and large is helping you to understand is if this is something you can start off right away to just understand where you stand. I would say that should be the next step, and that shouldn't cost you anything to just have a couple discussions to figure out how complex could this completing the level one, how complex is that going to be for my organization? So for some of you, you may already have some global partners and suppliers that you're working with, and we definitely want to communicate and alarm everybody that you're going to start on this journey so that they realize they need to also start on this journey. So keep in mind, if you haven't heard of this from your MSP, your partners and things, they are aware. And so we want to put you in a good first step. So I would say that would be number one. And then beyond that, understanding within your group, do you have the right people that can help you start to go on that level one self-assessment journey? And if not, that's something we can definitely put you in touch with the right people to help you get that part done too. Any other
Right.
questions?
I was going to add to that. You know, what Abaxent's done is, you know, over the past year and a half, we've been knowing certain things were coming down the pike, and we've been preparing for them from different aspects. Like I said, from the insurance aspect, from the how you're going to do this internally, from the government aspect, from the larger enterprise level client base. And what we have for you, if you engage, is we have a team of resources that are the folks who can help you. Okay. Abaxent's not going to do that. Abaxent's not certified to do this. What we are good at is we understand the ecosystem and what's out there, and we can help, which is what we've done here to help you get educated to figure out, you know, how you're going to start to put a plan together, and how you're going to approach, and as we all said, get on the yellow brick road and go down it. We have a team of resources that you can be teamed with to get this done. You know, we are still in the process of putting more folks into that batch of folks that can help. And what we're going to do is sort of help you short circuit the piece of how do I find somebody? How do I know who's what? How do I, you know, we understand this. Okay. We understand how to vet the people who can help you and how to bring them in. So basically what we're going to do is introduce you to the appropriate folks, and you guys take it from there. Yeah, so that's our contribution to the ecosystem is we need not to have more companies come in and say they're offboarding 3 or 4 or 500 resources, because let's face it, we are the resources that they will be offboarding because of physical size, lack of information, that type of thing. So that's really where this sits.
That's an excellent point. So that made me think about this. You know, when they open this up for us to all go online and find like our people to work with, they don't necessarily have a lane that's just for small business. So if you think about your organization and you think about another organization that's much bigger than you, and you're both going after the same resources to help you with your level one assessment, your level two assessment, you're not going to win that fight. So we can help you get ahead of that line a little bit because we already have the type of people who can help you with the right certifications, like coding and things, versus you going out there on your own and saying, hey, I need some help. That company by and large is going to say, okay, well, where are you? Are you the easy win? If you're not, then they're going to put you on hold and go after the easy win, because you know everybody has to be able to eat. And so what we're doing is saying we're caring enough about this group to help you take some of those initial first steps, even before the level one assessment, because we're not going to just jump into that. that some of the companies that are providing these different services, either they don't know a lot about small business, maybe they don't know a lot about your particular industry. And so those extra steps that we're willing to take, you probably won't get that same level of support. So
Yeah,
Donna
what
comes to
I was
that
going to
point.
say is one of the things that we didn't talk about is like all industries, the scammers that are in our industry here to do this, and there are a lot of and that was one of the reasons that we took this step to do this over a year ago, is that there's a lot of, you would get emails saying, hey, for $800 I can get you level 1, or for $5,000 I can guarantee you that. No, that's one of the reasons that the United States government also stepped up and said, we're done with this. Okay, because there's just too many bad actors in the environment and in the ecosystem. So that's one of the reasons you see that there are these certification levels that are now serious. That's one of the reasons that you see the government starting to nail down this stuff and say this is going to be mandatory. And like I said, you need to look in your ecosystem and look up and see what's mandatory for the folks that you're trying to do business with. Because they are getting very locked down with this. And the key reason is, as with all things, there's scammers out there, and they want to be paid a certain amount of money to get you to a certain level, and no one can come in and promise that. Nobody. They can't. And
Right.
that was
And
where we decided to step into this and say, hey, okay, we got to do something else here, because this is crazy. Because what happens is it hurts the SMB communities, because they don't know. Yes,
and
this
that's
is a lot of stuff. It's overwhelming, but it's necessary.
and Adonica, a key point to make is if you get a CCP or CCA or an RP that tells you that
Right,
says I can get you a certain level,
right.
you can go ahead and report them to the Cyber AB, because that is against our code of professional conduct within
Yes,
the Cyber
right,
AB. We are not allowed to do that ever.
right. Yeah, so, and that, if you didn't get anything else out of the hour and a half, you got that says somebody promising you something that is not a thing. Okay, they can't, and they should be reported, because that's why the government is tightening up on this stuff, because there's just too many bad actors in the environment, and bad actors always come out and they scam people and they waste money. And as SMB businesses, we can't afford to do that, to shell out that kind of money and get nothing back for it.
Thank you, Adonica and Cody and Gina, for a fabulous and brilliant, super informative program. I don't see questions in the chat. If anybody would like to put one in, please do. But I also think that when there's this kind of just a lot of information, it's
Yes.
really hard to process,
Yeah.
what is a question for me. So please go ahead and take their offer of the raffle up, and if you decide that you do want to use somebody else, obviously that's completely fine. And we have some other WBEs, and there's lots of other companies. And hopefully this information that you were given today will help you be good consumers of that. Excuse me. So,
And Aaron, I don't mean to cut you off. I think
Adonica,
we
please.
have one last slide, Aaron.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No, not your bad. I think Aaron, yeah, okay. And we'll go back to this slide. I want to, just before we close out, I want to thank the partners that we have. Of course, Gina, as part of Ovation Point, has been invaluable. Procellus and I started this journey a year and a half ago at one of our organizations we belong to. We were supposed to be golfing. We weren't. We were drinking and playing a different game. But we came up with this and said, how do we help each other? How do we help the companies our size? Undying thanks to American Family from the insurance side. They loaned us their third party risk manager, who, as these things are flowing down from a national company, directed us in a lot of directions to say, we are terrified that we have over 4,000 vendors, and we're going to take a big dent in these 4,000 vendors, because the downflow of this, you don't think of American family being connected with the government, or everybody somewhere touches the federal government when they're this big. And they are rolling these things down, and they are looking at having to offshore, off vendor a lot of smaller resources, and they obviously don't want to do that. So undying thanks to them. Obviously WBDC, with Jesse and Karen, you guys are awesome. You help us. Hilltop is our partner to the north out of Canada, because we have folks who do work in Canada, and they are our partner out of the Canadian side of the business, because we have a lot of opportunity there, not only for us, but for our WBEs and our MBEs that we're working with. So then I was gonna say, Aaron, pop the raffle thing back up, and understand that that scan is basically so that you can get a feel on where you are, where you're sitting. So, and the other piece, as part of this is with the partners that I showed you and some additional partners that are coming on, our intent is that we will be able to match the smallest company with who they need, out of our pool of, partner participants that are joining this effort to get to help everybody get where they need to be.
Adonica, thank you so much. At one point in human history, nobody needed to lock doors, and then that that stopped being true. And this is just, again, sort of more steps along that. We have so many benefits from using, IT and in all of our business applications, and that, I mean, frankly, it allows some small businesses to exist that probably wouldn't have existed a generation ago. But along with that then comes, as Adonica said, the bad actors. And so we have to learn how to lock our doors. Again, excuse me, on behalf of the WBDC, I'm just gonna, I guess, turn it over to Jessie if she wants to close up. And we will be putting this recording, up on our website. That takes a little bit of time. So it'll be in our digital learning section of our website. Jessie?
Okay, great. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Karen, for kicking us off. Danica, thank to you and your team. And Cody, you gave a lot of information. I hope you had plenty of water sitting around you, because
I did.
yeah, it was
I did.
intense.
Thank you.
Okay, but especially to the attendees, we really appreciate that you took your time out to listen to this critical information. I mean, every single day, almost every single minute, you hear of some cybersecurity breach. So this is critical to you all in your industries as suppliers and to your customers, to make sure that you have the proper measures, metrics, processes in place to ensure and give your customers a level of comfortability in your ability to protect their information. So it is 10:55. We're going to close out. I'm going to ask Danica and her team to stay on a little bit so we can wrap up. If you have any questions, I'm going to ask Danica and her team to please provide your contact information in the chat room with the link where our participants can copy that for a few minutes. So again, thank you all, and I'll leave it up for just a few minutes for you to copy contact information. Anything anybody else want to add?
No, we've scared everybody half to death. They've all passed out.
Yeah. Okay.
I like your analogy, Karen. No, we didn't used to have to lock the doors, and now we have to lock the doors and the windows. And you might even have to have protection on the other side of the door. Because it's a little bit like the Wild West all over again.
Okay. Anybody else want to